So those are the principles of life cycle investing. Now let's compare, if you will, Zvi, for our audience tuned in here online. How does your approach, really the Bodie, Merton, Samuelson life cycle paradigm, compare to kind of the old school, tends to be more prevailing paradigm still in the markets today?
So in the early 90s, by which time I was already, a full professor at Boston University, I came to Bob Merton and I said, you know what, let's take your model and build in what I think needs to be a part of the standard approach to life cycle, and that is labor-leisure choice. And we worked on this together with Bill Samuelson, who is the son of Paul Samuelson, and a faculty member at BU. And we came up with a model which has kind of become the standard model for the life cycle, adopted by just about any theorist who writes on it. I mean, they may elaborate on it, but at its core, it's the Bodie, Merton, Samuelson model. And how does that differ, the theoretical model, from the existing, what I call old paradigm? And also, we'll talk after this about how you implement that. In other words, what does it imply in practice? Okay. So first of all, what is the measure of welfare? Well, in the old paradigm, which starts with the work of Markowitz and Tobin in the 50s and 60s, it's wealth, okay? And what is being maximized is the expected utility from end-of-period wealth. That turns out, I mean, for some purposes, that's fine. Very few purposes. In the real world, where you've got many periods and you've got a retirement decision to make, it's lifetime consumption. And in mathematical terms, you're maximizing utility or happiness from consumption in every period of your life.
And Zvi, remind our audience, so I mean, it seems like there would be different measures of risk as well. If you're managing towards wealth, it may be the volatility of your account balance. But in your paradigm, what is the metric of risk there?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, one of the things that Bob Merton harps on, and he made this point early on in his earliest papers, is that can be, and often is, a big difference between measuring risk in terms of your consumption or measuring risk in terms of wealth. In other words, wealth can fluctuate or may have to fluctuate in value in order for consumption to be smooth. Well, that gives rise to all sorts of hedging demands. I mean, that's really a key insight of Merton's model long before I started writing anything with him, okay? The time frame in the old paradigm is a single period. Now, it might be a very long period, like today and 30 years from now, retirement, and what you're trying to do in this model is maximize expected utility from end-of-period wealth. Well, a problem with that approach is that it often makes stocks, the major risky asset, seem less risky as you increase the length of the horizon. Why? Because if you're using average rate of return as the thing that's varying, the longer the time period, the narrower the range of possible values of average rate. But that's an illusion. That is to say, it's not, the right way to measure the risk is the shortfall risk, the cost of insuring against the shortfall. So that's a problem with this paradigm. In practical terms, a very big problem. And in the BMS paradigm, Bodie, Merton, Samuelson, many periods. In fact, in the limit, it's continuous trading so that you're frequently revising the portfolio, or whoever is managing the portfolio is revising it. And you see immediately the stocks are risky both in the short and in the long term. And that's where risk management becomes crucial.
It seems like a more dynamic approach, right? In the
Absolutely.
BMS paradigm, you really have to be dynamically rebalancing and adjusting towards the goal.
Yeah, I mean, think of, suppose this were a flight from here, Austin to Boston, okay? And one approach is to say, all right, we're going to take off, head in a certain direction, and that's it. 4.5 hours from now, we'll hit someplace. Hopefully it'll be Boston, okay? Versus from the time you start out, you've got Boston in your sights, and you're adjusting to make sure that you get there. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Risk management techniques that are employed. Well, in the existing or old paradigm, it's save as much as you can, so precautionary saving, and diversification. That's it. In the new paradigm, okay, that I'm advocating, it's those two things plus hedging and insuring. Very important. Okay. What are the retail financial products that are the objects of choice? Well, in the existing paradigm, it's, what is it? Cash, stocks, and bonds, the three mutual funds. And insurance policies, too, to manage some of the risks, okay? That's part of the existing paradigm. But in the new paradigm, you've got targeted saving accounts. In other words, specific hedging instruments that are designed to hone in on a particular goal. So it might be inflation-linked retirement income, or it could be tuition accounts, health savings accounts, things that have specific goals, and those are managed in a different way. Those are hedges. Okay, and I have here structured standard of living contracts. The only thing that today takes that form are, structured products like market index CDs, for example. But very few people use those. Very few financial planners are using those. I think they could be used a lot more. All right, quantitative model. The existing paradigm is really mean variance optimization. It's Markowitz with Tobin thrown in for the safe asset. Monte Carlo simulations of outcomes. This is much more high-powered mathematics, okay? And it takes a lot of study to master it. Right now, it's financial engineers, people working in institutional risk management who are up to speed in the mathematics of it. You really have to have, say, an undergraduate major in math, and you're learning dynamic programming and contingent claims analysis. It's Mertonian mathematics and finance. We're not getting into it in this discussion. What are the control variables? Well, the old paradigm, it's how much you save, how you allocate your assets, stocks, bonds, and cash, and adjusting your retirement date. Those are the control variables. In the new paradigm, you've also got a portfolio of contingent contracts. In other words, you can actually have a demand for products that have certain payoff structures. I mean, the example that I would give in the framework of retirement saving is income annuities, lifetime income annuities, which clearly are beneficial to at least people who don't have a bequest motive. So someone who's single wants to have as much income as he or she can get while they're alive, but doesn't really have any utility from income that's left over after they have passed. Well, you want to make sure that that person is making use of that contingent contract. For the same amount of retirement saving, you can get more income out.
So, you know, your paradigm seems much more holistic. It's also much more sophisticated and complicated. And I don't know a lot of advisors out there that are doing contingent claims modeling. I certainly am not. But I mean, I guess where does that all lead us? So you've got a very sophisticated model that targets the right goals. How can advisors actually harness this, or we as a financial services industry, how can we use this in practice?
Okay. So first of all, you got to be careful about the terminology you use.
Okay.
So we don't want to say contingent claims. We want to say insurance contracts. Okay? Because that's basically what they are. Although, if you're talking about call options, it's not really insurance. It's the upside. You're buying the upside. But the key point, and even options, are something that can be explained to people. Okay? Because options exist all over the place in everyday life. So terminology is very, very important. Certain terms become like dirty words. Got to stay away from them because people are going to, think, uh-oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I get that a lot. And I do know what I'm talking about, or at least I think I do. So that's a key issue. But one has to explain in simple terms. I don't think there's anything that I presented here that couldn't be understood or explained in a way that an average person can understand, if they're willing to listen. Now, of course, there are a lot of people just don't want to know. They are allergic. And I understand that perfectly because there are areas of my life where I tune out the minute the discussion gets technical. I mean, a good example is controlling my television set in the age of, remote controls and Netflix and streaming this and streaming that and DirecTV and all. I just don't have an interest in mastering all of that. All I want is when I press the on button, the television should turn on. And when I press end, it should turn, I have limited demands. But we live in a complicated world, and even for something like that, you can't be completely ignorant. There's a certain minimum amount that you have to know. And I want to learn it from somebody who's not trying to sell me on a particular product or solution.